Good morning, everyone. It's November the 15th, 2023. Yesterday I put up a video, and that was on hate. Today I'd like to talk about racism. And unfortunately, hate and racism have a tendency to walk hand in hand together with each other. And this is what we're seeing, unfortunately, in 2023 to update ourselves in what's going on and around the world. There's more hate crimes, there's more crimes of racism, and unfortunately, this is building up and building up. And what I'd like to talk about is being a senior, I want to talk about my experiences with racism, and that goes back to the early 1960s when I was possibly, I think I was about 11 years old at the time, that I had quite an interesting experience. My aunt, who was all white, of course, lived down in Washington, D.C. So my mother, that was her sister, we went down to visit her. Now, she lived with a white woman, and this white woman lived in an all-black neighborhood. That's the way it was described at that time. So the interesting thing is, it was there was a little black girl next door, and she and I got talking, and we wanted to play with our dolls, just our dolls, nothing else. And we just wanted to play on the couch and have fun with our dolls. That did not work out that way because my aunt and her friend, being the only two white people in a black neighborhood, that was not acceptable for two little girls, two different colors even, to play dolls together. And my mom and her mom talked, and her mother was saying, well, it's not that I don't want the two children to play dolls. Neither of them did. It's just the way the rules went at that point, because if anything happened and the little black girl got hurt, then my aunt and her friend would have been forced to move out in the neighborhood. So this was like, I couldn't understand it. So this was kind of a shock. This was my first experience of what racism was. Then, of course, being in Washington, D.C., I wanted to go to the washroom. So I go running into what was apparently the women's washroom, or I thought so. My mom stopped me and said, you can't go into that washroom. And I said, why not? It's just for the blacks only. And of course, I'm looking at my mother a little somewhat confused and thinking, Mom, I'm not dirty. I haven't been rolling in a mud puddle. I'm not covered in mud. I just need to go to the bathroom. And left my mom trying to explain that the difference between color. And of course, I'm just shaking my head at 11 years old, not understanding. I couldn't play with this little girl next door. Now I can't even go to the washroom. And then I was learning, then the next thing I found out, that the water fountains were next, that I went to drink out of a water fountain. And my mom said, you cannot drink out of that water fountain. And I said, well, why not? Because it's for blacks only. And I'm going, what? What's happening here? This doesn't feel like Canada, that's for sure. So that was my experience, being very young, trying to figure out what in the world was going on. And of course, by the time I got back to Canada as well, it was interesting because then my grandfather, I remember, was trying to explain, well, they have special schools for the so-called Indian children at the time. And of course, I'm trying to understand, well, what's the difference between black and white, and what's this about red? I mean, this was ridiculous. I was trying to figure this out. So it was very confusing as a child. Why did one person get better treatment than another person? And that wasn't right. And then going to church, well, everyone's supposed to be equal, and it was very confusing, even back then as a child. And today, even though it's got better, thanks to Martin Luther King and everyone in that era who marched and did what they had to do, things were starting to improve over the years. Now it seems like after the pandemic, all bedlam has broken loose here. But one of the things I think was good was in the 60s as well. They showed the film Gone with the Wind. And so we went into the theater, and it was at that time, it's now called the Bytown Museum Theater, but at that time it was the old Nelson Theater. So we piled in there to watch the movie, And I'm listening and I'm trying to understand, holy cow, all the different things that my mother was trying to explain in Washington that had the history behind all this. And it was interesting because at the time we grabbed some drinks and everyone was just so into the movie and into talking about things at that time that we went around the corner with our drinks. And at that time, King Edward had great big beautiful elm trees for shade down the middle median. And we sat under there and talked about it. And some of the things that were coming out was my dad, too. He said, oh my gosh, was I ever in the wrong? And I looked at Dad and said, what do you mean you were in the wrong? And he was talking about how back in the 1920s, that vaudeville was big at that time. And how we made fun of the black people. And that was, of course, the blackface. And he says, I dressed up as blackface myself. And I've seen the pictures. Dad actually showed me pictures later trying to explain about the racism. And he said, I was so terribly wrong. Why were we getting that spilled at us back then? Driven into our brains that we were not all equal. And that's not right. So it was a great big conversation piece as well that came out with Gone with the Wind. And of course now with the Black Lives Matter movement, it's kind of got buried, Gone with the Wind. But I really believe that they should pull Gone with the Wind out of the mothballs and show it again, because as a teaching tool. Because believe me, it started a lot of conversations around racism. And maybe that's one of the ways we really need to help each other get these conversations going, figure out ways to stamp out this racism that's going today. So I just wanted to give you another brief video again on racism and the hate, because it led to a civil war. And are we going to have a civil war? We certainly are having a lot of unrest right now with the protests and everything going on around the world. We need to come together again, as I've always said. So please, everyone, be safe, watch your surroundings, and look at your neighbor and say hello to your neighbor, no matter what color they are, because everyone is equal. And take care, everyone. Bye-bye.